As we look back over the last 14 weeks of the material that we've covered and the massive amount of ground that we have looked at and the different locations that we have viewed over the last 14 classes, it's really easy, I think, for us to sort of rise above that and think about, well, where have we come from? We came from an absolute monarchy in France and many different Swiss-related territories, and Italy going from sister republics or from small states to sister republics and back into Austrian hands. We have come to the end of this period in a phase that is one that I think is important for us to sort of sit back and look across the time and the space, and that's what I intend to do here now. So if we look at the way in which we've viewed history over the last 14 weeks and this week, we've looked at different localities within Europe and the Americas, but we've also taken a more conceptual view over the Industrial Revolution and the industrial era and the spawning of this new age inside of world history. And all of these factors, the Industrial Revolution, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and the different democratic vibrations going on across the globe cannot be ignored as we enter into the 19th century. So when we do so, obviously Napoleon's actions are significant, and we can't forget the fact that his life is one that significantly changes global history. But it's also important for us to step back for a second and look at where has Europe gone to, right? So if we look at the map in 1812 of Europe, right, if you look at the territory that the French Empire now absorbs, and the Spanish kingdoms and Portugal, right? So Portugal and Britain are really the only two Western European nations that are independent. Spain is basically under Napoleon's control, while so are the Confederation of the Rhine and other territories, right? But the time we get to 1815, right? There is a massive change, and that change is that we have had the Congress of Vienna, and Napoleon has been put into at first Elba and then finally St. Helena. But we also want to remember that when this occurs, boundaries are reestablished, right? So the France of 1812 now goes back to its 1789 boundaries. And in southern Italy, in southern Europe, you have a return to much of what was going on beforehand, right? The eradication of the Cisalpine Republic, return of the Roman Catholic Church and Papal States, and all of these other changes. The Austrian Empire has grown, right? Again, if we look back at this when we are examining the size of the Austrian Empire, the Austrian Empire at this point is the largest empire in Europe, with the exception of Russia, perhaps, but it's on a very tenuous ground. And the reason it's on tenuous ground is that the Congress of Vienna is a conservative movement. It's a movement that is looking to swing the pendulum back and basically put the genies of the democratic revolutions back into a bottle that cannot hold it. So that when we get to places like France in the 18 teens and 20s, you're going to have massive conservative movements that are going to be bucking against the system of massive liberal movements, right? So you're going to have people like Louis XVIII when he becomes king in 1815 and is restored to the throne that are going to be very ineffective because they're going to try and bring back a conservative movement that does not exist and people do not want to exist. The greatest blunder here is Charles X. Charles X is exceptionally pig-headed, and even against all of the counsel that he receives, he does not necessarily run a good government. He's antagonistic to the journalists, and he passes laws that prohibit and force journalists from writing what are fine news stories, right? Just because they are against what he may or may not perceive. These conservative actions are all things that are going to be fighting against the democratic sensibilities that so many of the people of Europe had desired. And as this revolution spreads to the German states, to Belgium, to Poland, to Italy, there's going to be those things that we have talked about in the past, those journalists who have written so much in the lead up to the French Revolution and in the wake of the French Revolution, and in Belgium and in the Netherlands and all these other places. You're also going to have these secret societies that are going to continue. Within Germany, there's going to be these university professors, right? If you remember back to our conversation on Germany's revolution occurs in the mind. It occurs in the universities and the university towns. And that's where it's going to happen here again. For Belgium, it's going to be, once again, the conservative action of putting Belgium back under the control of the Dutch and back under the control of the Habsburgs, whereas the people of Belgium don't want that to be the case. They want independence and they want freedom, and they ultimately received their independence in 1839. For Poland, it's going to be an attempt to try and get away from Russian rule. For Italy, it's even more of a mess, because Italy is going to have a massive fight between the strong political and religious institution of the Catholic Church, the strong and political institution of Austrian control from outside. And all of that is going to create a situation that's going to make the people of Italy, and not the leaders of Italy, but the people of Italy, very concerned about their futures. You're also going to have small social clubs that are going to become exceptionally important. The Carbonari, which I mentioned in the Italy video, which is a small, civically minded, pseudo-political organization that has lodges, and people are going to be pushing for liberalism in those. You're going to have political organizations from Mazzini and Garibaldi, the Young Italy movement in the red shirts, and these attempts again to increase political activity and hope for the restoration of liberal ideology. And as we get out of the 1830s and we sort of fight this first wave of political turmoil as the revolutions have come to an end, when we get to 1848, these hot button issues are going to continue to be with us. And you're going to have people demanding universal suffrage. The king is going to flee. Louis Philippe, who is the third king after the Restoration, is going to oversee the beginning of the revolution, and then when he flees, it's going to bring in moderates and a fight between moderates and radicals. And there's going to be barricades set up in the middle of Paris. People are going to die in huge numbers. It's going to be a massive fight. But again, those institutions, those salons in France and those societies and the taverns, they're all going to play crucial roles in the emergence of these ideas and the spreading of these ideas. The one that I would like to finish here is with Italy, right? For Italy, the concern is the fact that you have a major player in the Pope within Italy. So when Pope Pius IX comes to power, right? So he is elected in a conclave in the 1830s. When he comes to power, many people see him as a great success because he is an Italian, which most popes were at the time, but he is an Italian who is seen as anti-Austrian, and he is going to push for greater Italian control within Italy. However, once he becomes the Pope, he doesn't want to fight. He does not want to fight Austria. Austria is too powerful, and the Pope and the papal forces are not. So once again, he is forced to flee. Within Italy, right, there's too many outside influences, whether it's the Bourbons in the southern portions of Italy, whether it's the Pope and his political considerations, or whether it's Austria and their concerns in northern Italy. The powers that exist within Europe are just too strong for the liberals to really succeed. And once again, there are more barricades, more fighting, and more problems created within the Italian states. After 1848, there is a massive change within the ideology of the politics. Items become more Machiavellian. The ends justify the means. The desire to get liberalism or these ideologies passed with disregard for what other institutions might say. And it is important to see, right, that the next 50 years, right, so if we stop at 1799 and we look until 1849, the fight that is going on in all of these places are going to be tremendous. And the disagreements that are going to happen here are going to be ones that are going to shake up the whole of Europe. Over the course of the last 15 weeks, we have looked at the spread of liberal ideology fighting against the institutions of conservative ideology. We started looking at this all with the Enlightenment back in the first week, and we continue until today to see where those roots ultimately lay. When we think back over the last 15 weeks, one of the things I have really tried to do is focus on the spread of liberalism and the entrenchment of conservatism. Now, I've also hopefully have done a decent job of explaining the ways in which these different narratives play out differently in different spots. And in an intellectual history way, how the circumstances of each place play into those ideas. The history of Europe and the age of revolutions, the problems of the Industrial Revolution and the problems of all of these revolutions plague Europe up until the 1900s. And many of those roots and the imperial problems that they will experience will lead to many problems that cause World War I. Thank you, and have a great end of the semester.